Actually, I own the land beneath it. That's impossible. Read the original deeds. Our clubhouse, the road, all of it. Welcome to my property.
I stared at the certified letter demanding $150,000 or my home. The homeowners association thought they had me cornered. They thought I was just a stubborn man on a rundown lot. But when my lawyer pulled the original 1,982 deeds, we discovered a secret they had buried. For 3 generations, the Robert family owned a quiet, sprawling 50-acre slice of heaven in the dense pine forests of the Pacific Northwest. My grandfather, Henry Robert, built the original cedar log farmhouse with his own 2 hands in 1968. Growing up, I spent my summers there, learning how to chop wood, fish in the creek, and appreciate the profound, uninterrupted silence of nature. When my father passed away, the property came to me. I was 45, tired of the corporate grind in Seattle, and desperate for the peace my grandfather's land promised. But peace, as I quickly learned, is a fragile commodity when there is money to be made. Over the decades, the surrounding forest had slowly been devoured by urban sprawl. The county had rezoned the adjacent lands, and before I knew it, a massive real estate conglomerate swooped in. They bought up the neighboring 300 acres, bulldozed the ancient pines, and birthed Oakridge Estates, a sprawling, manicured labyrinth of identical multi-million-dollar McMansions, pristine sidewalks, and aggressive homeowners. My grandfather had sold off a large chunk of his original acreage back in the late 80s to pay for my grandmother's medical bills, leaving me with a modest, irregularly shaped 5-acre parcel right at the edge of this new development. My driveway, a long, winding gravel path, now fed directly onto what had become Oakridge Boulevard, the privately maintained main artery of the estates. I didn't mind the new neighbors at first. I kept to myself, working remotely as an architectural consultant and spending my weekends restoring my grandfather's antique 1952 Ford tractor in my front yard. But Oakridge Estates was governed by an entity that viewed my existence as a personal insult, the Oakridge Homeowners Association. The trouble started with a beige envelope taped to my rusted, dented mailbox. I opened it over my morning coffee. It was a formal notice of infraction from the HOA, citing my property for a severe violation of community aesthetic guidelines. The offenses? My grass was taller than the mandated 2.5 inches. My mailbox was not the HOA-approved matte black with gold lettering, and the antique tractor was deemed unsightly mechanical debris. I chuckled, crumpled the letter, and tossed it into the wood stove. I wasn't in their HOA. I hadn't signed any covenants, conditions, or restrictions, CC and Rs. I owned my land free and clear. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one included a fine of $250. A week after that, I was underneath the Ford tractor, covered in grease, when a shadow fell over me. I rolled out on my creeper to find a woman standing at the edge of my driveway. She wore a tailored white blazer, designer sunglasses, and an expression that suggested she had just smelled something rotting. She was flanked by a man holding a clipboard, looking nervously between me and her. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "I am Beatrice Garmond," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial authority, "president of the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association. This is Richard Kinsley, our compliance officer." We are here to discuss your unpaid fines and your persistent refusal to bring this plot up to community standards. Beatrice, I said, leaning against the tractor, nice to meet you, but I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm not part of Oakridge Estates. My property predates your neighborhood by about 50 years. I don't owe you any fines, and frankly, my grass height is none of your business. Beatrice's lips thinned into a hard, bloodless line. Mr. Robert, you use Oakridge Boulevard to access the county highway. Our legal team has already established that your parcel is subject to an implied easement of our community rules. You are bringing down the property values of the entire estate. That rusty piece of garbage, she gestured wildly to the tractor, needs to be removed by Friday, or the fines will double. You need to leave my property, I told her, my patience evaporating. Now, we will be placing a lien on your home if you do not comply, she snapped, turning on her heel. Have a blessed day, Mr. Robert. Over the next 6 months, the harassment became a daily fixture in my life. Beatrice Garmond was relentless. The HOA started sending compliance patrols, golf carts driven by Richard Kinsley, to take photographs of my house from the edge of my property line. The fines kept rolling in, escalating with terrifying speed. $500 for unapproved exterior paint color. My house was natural cedar. $1,000 for unauthorized livestock. I had 3 egg-laying hens. I ignored the letters, throwing them into a growing pile on my kitchen counter. I knew I was in the right. I knew I wasn't in their jurisdiction. But what I didn't realize was just how far Beatrice Garmond and the Oakridge HOA were willing to go to force me out. They didn't just want me to clean up my yard. They wanted my land. The situation escalated from a petty annoyance to a full-blown war the spring I decided to build a timber frame barn. My grandfather's old shed had finally succumbed to dry rot, and I had drawn up plans for a beautiful, classic barn to house my restored tractor, my tools, and perhaps a small workshop. I pulled all the necessary county permits, had the land surveyed, and hired a local crew to start pouring the concrete foundation. The morning the cement trucks arrived, all hell broke loose. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the crew prep the forms, when Beatrice Garmond's pristine white SUV aggressively swerved onto my gravel driveway, blocking the first cement mixer from entering. Richard Kinsley leapt out of the passenger side, waving his arms frantically. "Halt! Stop all work immediately!" Richard yelled, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. I set my mug down, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, and marched down the driveway. "Beatrice, move your vehicle. You are trespassing, and you're costing me money by delaying these trucks." Beatrice rolled down her window, brandishing a thick legal document. "You did not submit architectural plans to the HOA review board, Mr. Robert. This structure is strictly prohibited. We are issuing an immediate stop work order." "You have no authority here," I roared, the anger finally breaking through my usually calm demeanor. I turned to the foreman, a burly guy named Mike. "Mike, go around them." "Drive over the grass if you have to." Mike looked at me, then at Beatrice, who was already on her cell phone. "Artie, man, I can't," Mike said apologetically. "She says she's calling the sheriff. I can't have my guys catching trespassing charges or getting our CDLs jammed up over a neighborhood dispute." True to her word, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived 20 minutes later. I explained the situation, showing them my county-approved permits and my property lines. The older deputy sighed, looking at Beatrice with a mixture of exhaustion and annoyance. "Ma'am, he has the county permits," the deputy explained. "This is a civil matter. You can't block his driveway. You need to move your car." Beatrice glared at the deputy, her eyes burning with a vindictive fire. "This isn't over, Jason. You are destroying our community. We will see you in court." Deputy. She practically tore the tires off her SUV as she reversed out of my driveway. The barn went up, But the victory was short-lived. Beatrice, humiliated in front of the construction crew and the police, decided to deploy the nuclear option. 3 weeks later, I was driving home from the grocery store. As I turned off the public county highway onto Oakridge Boulevard, the private road I had to use for about a quarter mile to reach my driveway, I slammed on the brakes. Right at the entrance of the boulevard, towering over the asphalt, was a brand new, heavy-duty, wrought iron security gate. It was completely closed. A keypad and an RFID scanner sat on a freshly bricked pedestal. I parked my truck and walked up to the gate. A notice was taped to the keypad. Dear residents, Oakridge Estates is now a secure, gated community. Please use your provided key fobs for entry. Visitors must be dialed in from a residence-approved landline. I hadn't received a key fob. I called the HOA management number listed at the bottom. A receptionist answered, and when I gave her my name, her tone immediately turned frosty. Mr. Robert, yes. Miss Garmond left specific instructions regarding your file. Your access fob will be released to you once your outstanding balance of fines, late fees, and legal administrative costs is paid in full. You are denying me access to my own home, I shouted into the phone. That's illegal. You may park on the public highway and walk to your residence, the receptionist replied dryly. But vehicular access requires an active, account in good standing HOA membership. Have a blessed day. Click. I was furious. I had to park my truck on the shoulder of a busy highway and carry 6 bags of groceries 3/4 of a mile in the rain to get to my house. The next morning, I woke up, fully intending to take an angle grinder to their shiny new gate. But before I could head out, I saw a thick, heavy envelope stuck in the crack of my front door. It must have been hand-delivered by a process server while I was sleeping. I carried it to the kitchen table, broke the seal, and pulled out a stack of dense legal documents. It was a formal notice of intent to lien and foreclose. I skimmed through the pages, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The HOA's law firm, a notoriously aggressive downtown outfit, had compiled every single fine over the past 18 months. They had applied daily compounding interest, exorbitant administrative processing fees, and a massive $50,000 penalty for the unauthorized construction of a commercial agricultural outbuilding, my barn. Furthermore, they charged me for the legal fees they incurred while drafting these very documents. The total sum at the bottom of the page was enough to make my vision blur. 15,420美元. The document stated that if the balance was not paid in 30 days, the Oakridge Homeowners Association would place a lien on my property and initiate foreclosure proceedings to seize my family home, auction it off, and recoup their losses. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, the silence of the farmhouse broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. I was a consultant. I made a decent living, but I didn't have 150 grand sitting in a bank account. My house was fully paid off, but this could actually take it from me. They had the money to litigate me into bankruptcy. They had walled me off from the outside world. Beatrice Garmond didn't just want me to conform. She wanted to bankrupt me, steal my grandfather's land, and probably turn my beloved property into a tennis court for her friends. I needed a miracle. Or, failing that, I needed a damn good lawyer. The next morning, I parked my truck on the highway, squeezed through the pedestrian gap next to the iron gate, and took an Uber into the city. I was heading to see Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan wasn't a flashy billboard advertising attorney. He operated out of a cramped, oak-paneled office above a bakery in the older part of town. He was a real estate attorney who had been practicing since before I was born, a man known for an encyclopedic knowledge of property law and a deeply ingrained hatred for homeowners associations. A buddy in the construction business had recommended him, calling him a junkyard dog with a law degree. I dropped the massive stack of HOA documents onto his desk. Jonathan, a man with a wild shock of white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, peered over them. Oakridge Estates, Jonathan muttered, recognizing the letterhead instantly. Beatrice Garmond. Ah, yes, the Wicked Witch of the Pacific Northwest. She's been terrorizing that zip code for 5 years. What did you do? Paint your front door. A non-approved shade of eggshell. I built a barn, I said, exhausted, on land that isn't even in their HOA. And now they've locked me out with a gate and say I owe them $150,000. They're threatening to foreclose. Jonathan stopped smiling. He picked up the intent to lien notice, his eyes scanning the aggressive legalese. This is bold, even for Garmond. If your property isn't platted within the HOA subdivision, they have no legal authority to fine you, let alone foreclose. That's what I've been telling them, I said, throwing my hands up. But they claim I have an implied easement because I use Oakridge Boulevard. They say my driveway connects to their private road, which puts me under their jurisdiction. Jonathan frowned, tapping a brass pen against his chin. Implied easement by necessity. It's a stretch. Usually, that grants you the right to use the road. It doesn't subjugate you to their bylaws, unless... He trailed off, looking out his dusty window. Unless the developer slipped something into the original master deed when they bought the surrounding land from your family. My grandfather sold that land in the 90s, I explained, long before Oakridge Estates was ever conceived. Jason, Jonathan said, leaning forward, the junkyard dog finally catching a scent. Real estate is all about the paper trail. Developers make mistakes. HOAs make assumptions. We need to go back to the source. We are going to the county archives. The county clerk's office was a cavernous, windowless basement filled with the smell of old paper, ozone, and floor wax. For 3 grueling days, Jonathan and I pored over massive, leather-bound plat books, microfiche records, and digital scans of property lines dating back to 1968. We traced the history of the Robert estate. We found the 1994 sale, where my grandfather, Henry, sold 200 acres to a development company called Horizon Builders. Horizon had planned to build a modest neighborhood, but the 2008 financial crisis hit, and they went bankrupt before laying a single brick. The land sat untouched for years until a massive luxury developer, the creators of Oakridge Estates, bought the distressed asset from the bank in 2012. Here, Jonathan said on the 3rd afternoon, pointing a trembling finger at a faded, yellowed plat map from 1994. Look at this line. This is the boundary of the 200 acres your grandfather sold to Horizon Builders. I leaned in, squinting at the tiny surveyor's markings. Okay, and, Jonathan said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Look at this central corridor. It's a 15-acre strip running right through the middle of the development. It connects your current 5 acres all the way to the public highway. Oakridge Boulevard, I breathed. Exactly. But look at the designation, Jonathan said, sliding a magnifying glass over the document. I looked closely. The central corridor wasn't marked as part of the sale. It was labeled Robert Family Trust, Retained Access, and Common Utility, Revocable. What does that mean? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Jonathan sat back, running a hand through his white hair, his eyes shining with disbelief and pure joy. It means, Jason, that your grandfather was a very smart, very cautious man. He didn't sell the access road. He retained the deed to that 15-acre strip to guarantee his family would always have access to the highway, regardless of what the developers built around it. He leased it to Horizon Builders on a $0.99-year agricultural easement, with the stipulation that they maintain it as a right-of-way. Wait, I said, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. If my grandfather kept the deed to the road, and the trust dissolved when my father died, and everything passed to me. You own the road, Jonathan said flatly. But Oakridge Estates paved it, I argued. They built their security gate on it. They built, I stopped, a sudden realization hitting me like a freight train. I grabbed the modern 2015 Oakridge plat map and overlaid it on the 1994 map, holding them up to the fluorescent light of the basement. My breath caught in my throat. The 15-acre strip my grandfather had retained didn't just cover the road, it widened in the center of the development. "Jonathan," I whispered, pointing to a massive square on the modern map that sat squarely inside my grandfather's retained property line. "What is this building here?" Jonathan leaned in. He started to laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a deep, booming laugh that echoed through the quiet archives. "Jason," Jonathan said, wiping a tear from his eye. "When Oakridge bought the bankrupt land in 2012, they must have rushed the title search. They saw common utility and assumed it meant HOA common area. They incorporated your grandfather's 15 acres into their private estate. So, they built the gate on my land," I said. "Worse," Jonathan smiled, tapping the map. "They built their $2 million community clubhouse, their private Olympic-sized swimming pool, and their tennis courts on your land. Jason, you don't owe the HOA $150,000. You are their landlord, and they are currently trespassing." A wave of dizzying euphoria washed over me. Beatrice Garmond, in her arrogant attempt to steal my home and enforce her petty rules, had unknowingly picked a fight with the man who literally owned the ground she walked on. "So," I said, looking at Jonathan, feeling a dangerous smile form on my own face, "what's our next move?" Jonathan snapped the heavy ledger shut. The sound was like a gavel dropping. "We don't just fight the fine, Jason. We enforce your property rights. It's time to send Miss Garmond an eviction notice." Jonathan didn't just want to send a letter. He wanted to orchestrate a legal shock and awe campaign. If Beatrice Garmond understood one language, it was the language of absolute, unyielding authority. It was time for her to learn what real authority looked like. "We need undeniable, physical proof before we drop the guillotine," Jonathan explained, pacing his cramped office. "The HOA has operated under the delusion of ownership for a decade. A simple letter will just make them hire their expensive corporate lawyers to bury us in injunctions. We are going to establish possession first." Our first call was to David Miller, a grizzled, no-nonsense land surveyor who had been charting the county for 40 years. David was the kind of man who trusted satellite GPS but still verified everything with an old-school transit level and an encyclopedic knowledge of historical property markers. 2 days later, at exactly 7 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning, David's battered yellow work truck rolled to a stop in front of the massive wrought-iron gate of Oakridge Estates. I was waiting for him, parked on the shoulder of the highway. I had a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters resting in the bed of my truck. "All right, Jason," David said, unrolling the 1994 master plat map on his hood. I pulled the original county coordinates. "Your grandfather's 15-acre retained parcel starts exactly 3 feet out from the center line of the public highway. That means this entire brick pedestal, the keypad, and the gate itself are sitting dead center on your private property. Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, adrenaline thrumming in my veins. "I'd stake my license on it," David grunted. "Let's mark it." David and his assistant spent the next hour pounding bright neon-red wooden stakes into the manicured emerald green turf alongside the entrance. Every 50 feet, a hammer blow echoed through the quiet morning, driving a stake that clearly delineated the true boundary of my land. The line ran straight down the edges of Oakridge Boulevard, effectively boxing the road in. By 8:30 a.m., the morning commute for the residents of Oakridge Estates had begun. Luxury sedans and sleek SUVs lined up at the gate, their drivers staring in absolute bewilderment at the surveyor hammering red stakes into their pristine landscaping. Then came the pièce de résistance. I walked up to the heavy iron security gate that had locked me out of my own home. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the bolt cutters from my truck, clamped the heavy steel jaws over the padlock that secured the manual override box, and snapped it. I flipped the hydraulic release lever, With a loud, pressurized hiss, the massive iron gates swung wide open, locking into their recesses. I grabbed a thick, heavy-duty logging chain, wrapped it around the gate hinges, and secured it with my own hardened steel padlock. The gate was now permanently open. Within minutes, the screech of tires signaled the arrival of Richard Kinsley, the HOA compliance officer. He practically fell out of his golf cart, his face an apoplectic shade of purple. "What in God's name are you doing?" Richard shrieked, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "You are vandalizing community property. I'm calling the police. I'm calling Beatrice." "Call whoever you want, Richard," I said smoothly, leaning against the now chained gate. "But you might want to read this first." I handed him a formal laminated notice that Jonathan had drafted. Richard snatched it, his eyes darting over the bold print. Notice of change of ownership and revocation of trespass. The land upon which this gate sits is the sole private property of the Robert Family Trust. All unauthorized structures, including but not limited to electronic gates, brick facades, and landscaping, are currently in violation of property lines. The gate has been disabled to allow the rightful owner access to his property. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. This is a forgery. We own this road. The HOA owns this road. Your developer lied to you, David Miller called out, driving another red stake into a bed of imported tulips. You're trespassing, buddy. By noon, the red stakes had marched half a mile down Oakridge Boulevard, straight into the heart of the community, and that was where the true magnitude of the developer's screw-up became gloriously visible. The 15-acre parcel didn't just encompass the road. It ballooned outward in the exact geographic center of the neighborhood. "Jason," David said, looking through his transit lens and whistling softly. "Come, look at this." I peered through the scope. The crosshairs rested squarely on the front doors of the Oakridge Estates Community Clubhouse, a sprawling, two-story structure boasting Italian marble columns, a wraparound veranda, and an adjacent Olympic-sized infinity pool. "The boundary line," David stated, consulting his GPS tablet, "starts at the edge of the parking lot, cuts right through the middle of the tennis courts, encompasses the entire swimming pool, and swallows the clubhouse whole. They built a $2 million recreational facility on your grandfather's dirt." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. It wasn't just a win, it was utter annihilation. "Mark it," I told David. "Mark every inch of it." For the next 3 hours, David and his crew drove stakes around the perimeter of the clubhouse. They ran bright orange surveyor's tape from stake to stake, effectively cordoning off the crown jewel of Oakridge Estates. A crowd of angry, confused residents in tennis whites and designer loungewear had gathered, watching in horror as their exclusive sanctuary was wrapped in neon plastic. At 3 p.m., the storm finally hit. Beatrice Garman's white SUV came tearing into the clubhouse parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. She slammed the door, her high heels clicking furiously as she marched toward me. She was flanked by 2 men in dark suits, clearly the HOA's legal muscle. "Remove this tape immediately, Robert," Beatrice screamed, her usual composed facade completely shattered. "You have lost your mind. This is criminal trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. You are going to jail." "Beatrice," I said, entirely unbothered, "I'd like to introduce you to my attorney, Jonathan Hayes." Jonathan stepped forward from the shadow of the clubhouse awning, holding a thick manila folder. He looked like a grandfather about to scold a misbehaving child. "Miss Garmond," Jonathan said, his voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the gathered residents. "This is a certified survey verifying the legal boundaries of the Robert Family Trust. As you will see in the attached deeds, your developer, Horizon Builders, and subsequently your current management, failed to secure the title for this 15-acre tract. You hold a revoked agricultural easement, which explicitly prohibits the construction of permanent recreational structures." One of the men in suits, a lawyer named William Danforth, snatched the folder from Jonathan. He opened it, his eyes scanning the original 1,994 documents. I watched the color rapidly drain from his face. "Bill?" Beatrice snapped. "Tell him he's insane. Tell him we're suing him for everything he has." Danforth didn't answer. He turned to the second page, then the third, his finger tracing the surveyor's seal. He looked up at the clubhouse, then down at the red stakes. "Miss Garmond," Danforth whispered, his voice cracking, "we need to go back to the office now." "What do you mean we need to go back?" Beatrice demanded, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "Make him take down the tape." He locked the front gate. "Beatrice," Danforth said, grabbing her arm tightly. "Shut up. Do not say another word. We have a massive problem." Before Beatrice could argue, Jonathan cleared his throat. "Before you leave, Miss Garmond, my client has a formal delivery for the Homeowners Association." Jonathan handed her a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a complex legal document. It was a standard, county-approved notice. "What is this?" Beatrice spat, looking at the paper as if it were radioactive. "That," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "is a 30-day notice to vacate. You have 1 month to remove your clubhouse, your pool, and your tennis courts from my property. Oh, and regarding that $150,000 fine you issued me, consider it a down payment on the back rent you owe me for the last decade." The silence that fell over the parking lot was absolute. Beatrice Garmond stared at the paper, her hands shaking violently. For the first time since I met her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The fallout was spectacular, swift, and completely devastating for the Oakridge Homeowners Association. Within 48 hours of the survey, the neighborhood was in a state of civil war. The residents, who had blindly paid thousands of dollars a year in HOA dues, discovered that their corrupt leadership had funded a multi-million-dollar clubhouse on stolen land. Panic set in. If the HOA was forced to demolish the clubhouse and pay me back rent, the association would be bankrupt. Every homeowner in Oakridge Estates would be hit with a massive special assessment, potentially tens of thousands of dollars per household, to cover the legal disaster. Beatrice Garmond tried to fight back. She convened an emergency, closed-door board meeting, attempting to rally the community against me. She claimed my documents were fraudulent and that the HOA would easily claim the land through adverse possession. But Jonathan had already anticipated that move. 2 weeks later, we met Beatrice, Richard Kinsley, and their lawyer, William Danforth, in the chambers of Judge Robert Caldwell for an emergency injunction hearing. Beatrice looked exhausted. The pristine white blazer was wrinkled, and the arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a look of cornered desperation. "Your Honor," Danforth began, smoothing his tie, "the HOA has openly and notoriously maintained this property for over 10 years. Under the state statutes of adverse possession, we request an injunction to halt Mr. Robert's eviction notice and formalize the HOA's ownership of the tract." Judge Caldwell, a no-nonsense magistrate with a deep, rumbling voice, peered over his reading glasses at Danforth. "Mr. Danforth, are you seriously trying to claim adverse possession on a parcel that was explicitly governed by a recorded 99-year agricultural lease?" Danforth swallowed hard. The terms of the lease were misunderstood by the original developers, Your Honor." Jonathan stood up. "Your Honor, adverse possession requires the occupation to be hostile. In this case, the developer had permission to use the land specifically as a right-of-way and agricultural buffer. However, the lease contained a strict termination clause. If commercial or recreational structures were built, the lease was immediately voided and possession reverted completely to the Robert Trust. They broke the lease the day they poured the concrete for the swimming pool." Judge Caldwell reviewed the documents. He sighed heavily, tossing the file onto his desk. He looked directly at Beatrice. "Miss Garmond," the judge said softly, "you built a castle on another man's foundation. You have zero legal claim to this land. The Robert Trust owns the road, the land under your gate, and the acreage beneath your clubhouse. I am denying your injunction. The eviction notice stands." Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. But the clubhouse cost $2.5 million. We can't just move it." "Then I suggest," Judge Caldwell replied dryly, "you start negotiating with your new landlord." Case dismissed. The reality of the situation finally crushed the Oakridge HOA. They were completely at my mercy. If I forced the eviction, they would have to bulldoze their own community center and rip up the tennis courts, bankrupting the association and utterly destroying the property values of the neighborhood, the very thing Beatrice had accused me of doing. The day after the hearing, Danforth called Jonathan, begging for a settlement. I didn't want to destroy the neighborhood. I didn't care about their pool or their fancy Italian marble. I just wanted my peace, my grandfather's land, and to ensure that Beatrice Garmond could never terrorize anyone ever again. We dictated the terms of surrender, and they were absolute. First, the $150,000 fine and the impending foreclosure on my home were completely voided. The HOA was forced to sign a legally binding covenant in perpetuity, stating that my 5-acre parcel was completely exempt from any and all Oakridge Estates rules, regulations, dues, or oversight. I could paint my house neon pink and park 10 rusty tractors on my lawn, and they couldn't say a word. Second, the wrought iron security gate was removed permanently. Oakridge Boulevard remained a private road, but I granted them an access easement on the strict condition that it remained open and unobstructed to the public highway. Third, and most importantly, I agreed to lease the 15-acre parcel containing the clubhouse and pool back to the HOA. But I wasn't going to be cheap about it. I charged them an annual land lease fee of $120,000 adjusted yearly for inflation. Finally, as a non-negotiable term of the settlement, Beatrice Garmond and Richard Kinsley were required to immediately resign from the HOA board and were barred from ever holding an administrative position within the community again. The residents of Oakridge Estates, terrified of losing their clubhouse and facing bankruptcy, forced Beatrice out the very next day. She put her McMansion on the market 2 months later and moved away, unable to bear the humiliation of driving past my property and my newly built, magnificent timber frame barn every single day. As for me, the $120,000 annual lease payment more than covered my property taxes and gave me the financial freedom to retire early from consulting. I spent my days restoring antique tractors, tending to my chickens, and enjoying the profound, uninterrupted peace of the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes, on a warm summer evening, I sit on my front porch with a glass of iced tea and look out over the road. I watch the wealthy residents of Oakridge Estates drive past, heading to the clubhouse that sits on my land, paying for a luxury lifestyle that directly funds my early retirement. They thought I was just a stubborn man on a rundown lot. They thought they could bully me, bankrupt me, and steal my family's legacy. But they forgot the golden rule of real estate. Always, always check the deed. Because sometimes, the man you are trying to evict turns out to be the king of the castle. If you love this story about taking down a tyrannical HOA and proving that the little guy can win, smash that like button right now. Have you ever had a crazy experience with a neighborhood association or a neighbor from hell? Drop your wildest stories in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more insane, real-life revenge stories every week.